now. So if you want to review the slides or the recording afterwards, we'll send that around. It'll also be made available on our COVID-19 website, which you can find via our homepage. So keep an eye out for that. So yeah, I think that's basically the main points. Without further ado, I'll hand things over to Rob to get us started. So Rob, go ahead.
Thank you, Alex. I'm glad everyone could join us this morning. Let me jump right in. I'll take you through what we know is a very usable approach towards planning. But let me set the stage. The global pandemic has clearly scrambled literally everything we do in our business, our government, and certainly in our private lives. We're still reeling and looking for answers about how to fix this, about what it is and how to fix it. But we will find a way out of the crisis. And well before that happens, you should be asking, what will things look like when we emerge from the crisis phase and begin to move into recovery mode? What kind of world and business environment will there be? And the absolute best answer, the truthful answer is we just don't know. The crisis has descended with such incredible speed and brought such large changes. It's hard to fathom what has happened, much less what will happen next. And so there's huge uncertainty about how things will unfold, even 6 months from now. And it makes it impossible to predict with any certainty what recovery will look like. A lot of people are trying to do that, and they're offering predictions with an air of certainty. But you have to be cautious about those because there's a very low success rate for those kinds of predictions. Some people are calling for, dystopia, total collapse. Other people are saying, well, there's a potential for a rapid rebound. There's such a wide range of predictions. It's really hard to tell. It's impossible to know which one to believe, although some of them resonate more than others. But when there's a large amount of uncertainty about the future, experienced planners shift to scenario planning. Scenarios are short stories, basically, using a structured approach to create plausible future states that describe what could be. They allow us to explore what it would be like to survive and thrive if we found ourselves in that particular situation. Scenario thinking helps you prepare for a future no one can predict with accuracy. And it's meant to open our eyes to both the opportunities that will be presented, new opportunities, but also to hidden risks. Miller Center team asks, when there is a rebound, what will the world look like and how will we operate to accomplish our vision and missions? And we created 4 scenarios so that we could begin to anticipate how we should prepare. We developed the short stories for each scenario and describing the future state about how existing programs would change and what new ones would be needed, how funding would be acquired, how we would access key resources that are essential to our success, basically how our team would operate and the working conditions there, and how we would partner, all basic elements of our business. The planning exercise has given us a very usable framework for what we should expect and the challenges we're going to face. It's already informing our planning and budgeting process and helping our team begin to prepare for what the recovery phase will look like. So we've taken our scenarios and modified them enough so that you could be able to use them, as opposed to having to start from scratch and create your own scenarios. We've modified ours and made them, at least the framework of ours, and made them something that you can use so that you can get a sense of the world you will have to prepare for. And that's what we're going to present to you today. Now, scenarios are structured, I mentioned that, and what you do is you build them around 2 very important and uncertain aspects of the world. 2 of the most important uncertainties, or one of the largest, is certainly the economic situation, the short-term economic recovery, and the amount of, basically that looks at the robustness of supply chains that deliver products and services, the level of demand, economic deterioration will have occurred, at least for the short term, and there may simply not be demand for certain things. And it also looks at overall financial robustness. And this provides a good picture of what people need, what they're consuming, and the ability to generate and deliver the products and services that are out there. And again, it's not a big long-term projection. It's in the short term, where will we be sitting relative to the economic recovery? And it could be a fast recovery, or it could, in fact, be something, the damage be so great that the recovery is halted and halting. Now, the other one is the extent of enterprise damage. That's the enterprise that you work in, whatever sector you're in, lighting, water, healthcare, off-grid electricity, and literally all of them, there will be a loss of businesses. Some will close up shop. But also those folks that you work with as well as compete with, direct and indirect competitors, will be in some state of change, and some will be, and frankly, in survival mode. The ecosystem assessment also looks at the types of funding available, because if a company that has survived can't generate enough cash from internal operations or access external funds, it puts it in a disabled ability to operate, and it changes the way that things work. So we use those, the damage to the ecosystem you're in and the economy, state of the economy in the short term, to create these 4 scenarios. Difficult territory is the first scenario, where you basically have limited damage to the ecosystem and a recovering economy. I'll show you what that means in just a second. The second one is slightly different. It's limited damage to the economy, but it's a significantly weakened economy. And this is like going through land without a good map. It's going to be a different world. The third scenario is an unknown world, terra incognita. It's when you have a significantly weakened economy and there's been major damage to your ecosystem. Folks just aren't able to deliver the things that are needed. There's been high morbidity and mortality. And this fourth scenario is what we call the grueling terrain, where you have major damage to the ecosystem, but the economy is recovering, so that there's an upward lift to things. And we'll describe each one of these. But you should understand, as you're reading each one of these, that each is a possible future. They're all different from the others, and they all require different strategic and operational responses. Scenarios occur roughly 6 to 9 months from now, but the exact timing isn't really critical. The key point is that the scenarios describe the point where you come out of isolation and you're getting ready to go back to business. It's from a play not to lose strategy, which is what many of the enterprises are in today, and it's moving to a play to win, although it may be winning may have some new connotations depending upon the stringency and the difficulty of the economic conditions in your ecosystem. As you read the scenarios, keep in mind that they're not meant to be a perfect picture of what happened. They're useful models of what could happen. They're hypotheses, but more importantly, they allow you to look at what it would mean if they did occur. They should, frankly, challenge your expectations and stimulate some constructive conversation when you get around to working with them. And you need to immerse yourself in all of the scenarios. Avoid focusing on the one that matches your expectation and that you have a high confidence will happen. You have to admit in this exercise that there really is a great deal of uncertainty and we don't know. Use the scenarios to imagine how the things that you were sure would happen could be on a different course. So when you go into a scenario and you're looking at it, think about these things. What are the major elements of your business would be the same in this scenario as they are today or as they were before the crisis hit? What are the 3 most important things? The numbers illustrative, it doesn't have to be 3, but don't make it 20. It's a little too lean. but what are the most important things you'll do differently? And importantly, what will you need to stop doing? There probably are some things that will be either inefficient or inappropriate given the new situation you're facing. What are the new needs and major opportunities for you? Customer needs, or I'm calling the customer, whoever you serve, that group will likely be looking at different requirements, different needs. So it raises opportunities for you. It may also create challenges to your existing offerings. But importantly, think of these as opportunities as well as challenges and threats. What are the important partnerships? Working with others will always be important, and it takes on potentially new importance in each of the scenarios. And how will your team work and cope in this environment? This will create changes in the way that your team, yourself operate. So let's look at the four scenarios, and I'll go through them quickly. You may wish to go back and look at the slides later. I won't try to spend too much time on them, because what I want to do is get around to the so what. So what would happen if you were to find yourself in that scenario? Because that's where the real planning starts. But here are the scenarios. The first one, as I said, is difficult territory, which, there's been damage to your ecosystem that you work in, and the economy is injured but recovering. It's a very challenging landscape to try and traverse, but it's one that's not wildly unfamiliar. It's not as though the very fabric of what you do has been changed. So your ecosystem, your sector is partially intact, but there's been low, or in some cases, medium mortality of enterprises. Surviving enterprises are in a deep recovery mode, and they're seeking help, some to survive, and some are actually looking, like we expect you to be, to recover and to grow, to shift from play not to lose to more of a play to win. Most of the resources that you need, think things like critical materials, people that are essential, are available, but at times they're constrained. Again, it's not a totally healthy situation yet. And supply chains are fragile and slow, but they are intact and generally able to deliver a range of products and services to you and to others that are trying to rebuild their businesses. Internal and external funding is available, but it's beginning to look like it's not back to full strength, and some things take longer to get in terms of getting funding to supply what you need for rebuilding. Employment and financial strength are beginning to return, but not in all business sectors. Some will actually be still hammered and tough. But importantly, innovation is alive and well, and entrepreneurs are launching new businesses. The second scenario is uncharted lands. This is where there's been some damage to your ecosystem, and it's recuperating, but the enterprise, yours, is still and poised to come back, but the economy's weaker, so you've got less support. Managing the recovery feels like steering through unfamiliar terrain without a good map. So your ecosystem is mostly intact, and certain areas, probably in geography or certain customer areas, are recuperating and poised to bounce back, but the economic situation is holding back rapid recovery. Managing in this area is difficult. Many of the organizations have disappeared or in a diminished state. Survivors are still weak and moving with cautious recovery mode, or in a cautious recovery mode. Internal and external funds are available, but very limited, and funds are flowing more slowly than usual, and there are often strings attached. You're going to have trouble getting just a large free set of funds, because there's always going to be commitments or requirements associated with them. Many of the key resources you require are available, but overall supply chains are still a little sketchy and not as healthy. Required products don't always show up on time or exactly when you need them. And the overall weak economy and significant unemployment have decreased demand for an awful lot of goods, products and services. So it's an unbalanced recovery. And that scenario creates a different set of opportunities as well as risks than the first scenario. The third scenario takes us into a place where it's unknown. We haven't seen anything like this. You've survived, but there's been major damage to your ecosystem. Whatever you're in, you're seeing that what you produce and what other people were delivering that met the needs, whether it's for health or food or water or cooking, have been severely damaged and disturbed. The economy is hammered at this point. There's really not a lot, or there aren't a lot of resources available. It's a strange and unfamiliar place to work in. So the high mortality rate of enterprises in your ecosystem and partners that you work with is one of the biggest issues. It's basically many people have closed shop. The ecosystem's in tatters, and everyone's struggling. There are significantly fewer resources available that you need to make things work. And supply chains are in disarray, and some of them have been frankly obliterated. Products and services are flowing unevenly. Funding is a challenge. Internally and externally, funding sources are in shambles, and access to funds is constrained. Sometimes it's hard to find the funds, and then when you find them, it's difficult to access them. Demand for many types of products and services remain weak, and frankly, the mood is gloomy. Double-digit unemployment persists, and the timing and strength of the recovery is uncertain, but there's still innovation going on. Undeterred, some entrepreneurs are using the situation to launch new businesses. So the fourth scenario takes us into yet another kind of environment, the grueling terrain, where your enterprise is a survivor, but there's been some damage to your, well, actually major damage to your ecosystem. But the overall economy appears to be recovering slowly, but it's got a strong pull to it, creating opportunities for bouncing back. It's a difficult topography to maneuver in, but one that still provides interesting opportunities as well as risks. The survivors that are there, including yourself, are in recovery mode. Some are actually poised to be able to bounce back, but overall it's still a damaged ecosystem. Internal and external funding is limited, comes with strings attached, as we've seen, but the recovering economy is starting to bring about more external funding, and some revenues can be generated to be able to generate the resources you need to move forward. Other resources that you need are available. Supply chains are there, they haven't been destroyed, and they're able to supply your products and services. Unemployment's starting to recede, and the overall system is recovering. So those are four very different, plausible futures that you could find yourself in. And the purpose is not to say which one's right. In fact, I would strongly recommend you don't try and do that, but look at each one as a potential reality and say, so what would it be like to operate there? And engage your team basically to describe your mode of operation in each of those scenarios. Elements of your business that would stay the same, the things we talked about, three most important things that would need to change, what you need to stop doing, what are the new needs that you'll be providing. And when you write those down, you'll start to see that there are important differences between each of the scenarios, but there are also some similarities, general organizational and operational scenarios that start to show some similarities. And we found this at the Miller Center when we did it on our own. You might assume that each one of these is so different that you'd be operating in totally dissimilar manners. And there are some important differences. And you won't know which one you're going to end up in, which scenario you're going to end up in. But overall, you might start to see, in fact, you should expect to see some common elements. For instance, the need to create new offerings. What you did provide products, services, ways of interacting with those that you served and your own partners, begin to shift. You may have to create entirely new offerings, or you may modify ones. You may see that partnerships start to show important value, maybe more so than they have in the past, because the scenarios have put a strain on traditional supply chains, approaches, and the like. So partnerships are ways of filling the gaps. Doing more with less is a common theme often in each scenario. You will probably see that in each scenario, as you look at your operating mode, that key materials become very important, and finding new sources, or at least building some resilience into your sourcing and acquiring and using these materials is very important. So resilience in key materials and resources will be important. All of the scenarios put some strain on funds and funders, and so you will need to build those. And you also need to pay attention to building new ways, creating new ways for your team to work. Certainly virtual interactions have come to the forefront. We know that, but there will likely be others. So common challenges and opportunities are important. We selected at Miller Center, to give you an idea, 5, I believe, that were relevant to some degree in all scenarios, and we're actually integrating those into our current annual planning and budgeting process. You need to have your team work on these and spend time with them. And I'll give you a sense of how to do that in a second. But there's one other important element you need to do after you immerse yourself in the scenarios, which is identify leading indicators that will help you identify which scenario is emerging. We've admitted that at this point, you just don't know. The uncertainties overwhelm the ability to say with any certainty what will actually happen. But as time goes on, some of the uncertainty will begin to decrease. There'll be new things interjected in, but overall, the scenarios will begin to take shape, and you'll start to see some things be more likely to occur. And so identifying leading indicators that help you identify which scenario is emerging, because you've identified common elements that you can use to help you prepare and plan now, but you can't have identified all of the things that you need to do. So the next step is actually important. You need to track those leading indicators and revisit the scenarios every month or so to see if a clearer view has emerged as to which scenario is most likely. Once the uncertainties have decreased to a point where you can tell which scenario, or maybe combination of scenarios that you're going to face, you can then focus your planning on those specific elements and begin to prepare not only your team, but your processes, your offerings, your budgets, to be able to transition to operate so that your recovery can be stronger. And this is one of the major reasons for doing scenario planning. You start out with uncertainty being a given and look at 4 plausible scenarios and say, what would it be like to operate in them? That gives you a sense of what to do now, but it also allows you to begin to, with time, factor in new information and plan with greater certainty. So it's your ability to recover quickly and with a assuredness that you wouldn't have if you waited until the future was upon you, and that you then scrambled to try and put in place the changes you need to make or to prepare in ways. This allows you to get moving in a no regrets fashion, which is very important. Let me pause here for just a moment in the sequence of why you do this, and let you know that typically scenarios, usually go much longer than 6 to 9 months. They usually look much further out in the future, but now there's such uncertainty, and the issues around recovery are so important that we've compressed it. So this is an unusual scenario planning process, but it keeps true to the value of scenarios because the uncertainties are great. If you create scenarios on your own, which you should consider doing, but if you do that, it takes a while to form them and create them. The purpose of these that we've offered you is that you could use them and save a lot of time. The amount of time required to immerse your team in this different scenarios and create your operating models for each one doesn't need to be a long time. These are short stories, not long novels. Frankly, in the early days of scenario planning, we wrote long novels, but short stories are much better. And it only takes an hour or so for a team to create the short story around any one scenario. You can spend longer and you'll add more detail, but don't get caught up in trying to create the perfect picture. All you need is just enough to be able to realize both differences and similarities. And then spend time looking at those similarities and differences. After having immersed yourself in each scenario, look at all of them. And by the way, sometimes it's useful to look horizontally and vertically. Look at numbers 1 and 2 because they're both on the same side of the economic recovery, although they look at different levels of damage to your ecosystem. Same thing with 3 and 4, but also look at 2 and 3 because they have some similarities, and 1 and 4. So do, pairwise comparisons and see what's going on. Develop that sense of identify the leading indicators as well, so you can begin to unpack. But those kinds of sessions don't take a long time. You can do this in a day or so if you use the existing framework. If you want to create your own scenarios, and feel free to do that around 2 very important and uncertain elements, it'll take you a little longer because that construction process does take some discussion. But that's the process you use. It's not cumbersome. It's meant to get you moving quickly, and speed prior to moving into recovery mode is important. And although you're probably consumed with your current play not to lose phenomena, working on your cash flow, pivoting your business model, acquiring new funds, there should be time in your activities for looking at what's next. So traditional planning approaches don't work in highly uncertain and dynamic times like this. They force you to choose one outcome and bet on everything. And that can be a very costly mistake, and frankly, one you should not make right now. Uncertainties are too high to place your bets on just one number that the roulette wheel might deliver, given the uncertainties we face. But there's another mistake, which is to just sit back and wait for more information and for the retreat of uncertainty so that you have a much clearer picture. That almost guarantees that you'll be scrambling to get things done, and you'll be ill-prepared for what emerges. Now, you will be able to adapt, but scenario planning is meant to give you credible alternatives to guide your planning now, to let you move down a path towards greater preparedness and readiness, and to lay the groundwork for basically a no regrets recovery mode. And I think that Madeleine Albright, I'm sorry, it went forward. Madeleine Albright gave us some important advice here. She's seen the world disrupted and worked at it. And we have to realize that this is unfortunately something that happens. I won't call it normal, but it shouldn't come about as though it's never happened before. It most certainly has. So at this point, I wanted to stop. I've blistered my way through description. I've gone very quickly. I may have passed over some things. So we're probably at a point where we can stop sharing and look for discussion. Alex, can you come back on and help me manage questions? So I can...
Absolutely. Thanks, Rob. Really great information there. So yeah, if anyone has questions, feel free to I guess my preference is for you to raise your hand and we can take you off mute and you can ask your question live. But I do see something coming in via the Q&A. So Pamela asks how we can identify leading indicators. So Rob, can you talk a little bit about the leading indicators and what suggestions you have for identifying and implementing indicators?
Yeah, I was actually looking at my notes because I was working on what leading indicators could be. Those two axes that provide the framework for the scenarios are where you start. So on the general economic conditions, I would say that U.S. employment, I mean, if we're looking in the U.S., if you were looking in another country, you have to, but the unemployment levels are probably one of the important indicators about where things are moving in general economic terms. High levels of unemployment represent a host of different problems, people dislodged from jobs, obviously, but also decreased ability to buy, to purchase, even the most basic things. So that's certainly one. Another one would be to look at the availability of funding. If there's still large government outpouring of funds for small businesses in particular, and that, then you have a good indicator there. And I wouldn't try to look at all of them. I would create what I call an index, pick a couple of key funding agencies and see what their level of funding is, not just that week, but overall, how much are they pouring in? Has it been an upsurge? Has it dried up? So create some index, a way to at least sample some areas of funding. So those are two that would come to mind. On your own ecosystem, I would also look at an index, but this one is a rather sad index. It would be things like mortality, the number of folks that have shut down. So I'm just going to use an example, and I will do it very quickly, so I won't do a great job. But if you were providing cook stoves, one, there would be a lot of changes in those that provided not only cook stoves, but other cooking fuels and technologies. Picking some groups or examples is important. So in cook stoves, there's the issues of what the fuel is. Is it LPG? Is it biomass? Is it wastes being used? Is oil in some way being used? Or is it back to wood? So something that gives you a sense of how people have, how much damage has been done to those that are supplying it. Picking a few key players and seeing if they're still around or seeing what the recovery rate would be good. And again, you have to do this simply. You don't want to create microeconomic models, but that would be a very good thing to do. And also take a look at the availability of products and services. Some of those fuels may not be readily available, or the technologies to use them may not be available. So it would be difficult to provide anything there. But remember that changes in availability create opportunities as well. You might have to shift your offering, but there's one there. I think those are good examples of things that you should look at. But you'll have to create your own because each ecosystem is different.
Great, thanks, Rob. So again, a reminder to just open or raise your hands if you have questions. One came in via the chat from Matt Wallace. On a practical level, any guidance for doing this in a digital space at a distance? Any platforms you can use to order the conversation and capture the themes? So Rob, happy if you take that. Also happy to take a shot myself. But go ahead.
Well, let me start, and then we'll get you involved as well. We used Zoom. I'm not selling Zoom or suggesting that that's the only answer, but we worked in a digital platform. We did not all come together, but it had one advantage, which was one of the first times I had used it, was it had breakout rooms so that you could have different groups go off in parallel and work on each of the 4 scenarios, which was great. It condense the amount of time that we spent. And we had enough people in each group to create, vibrant discussions and get some good things. We had everyone write down on a document, a Google Doc, that all of the observations around what would change, what would you stop doing, what are the new opportunities, working conditions, so that everyone had responses and we could put those up on the screen and look at them. So whatever mode you use, you need to be able to not only see each other and work and exchange ideas, but you need to record things and be able to show them so that people can not only listen, but see what has been captured. Alex, what would you add to that?
No, that's basically what I was going to say. So let's
well, I didn't mean to steal your thunder, but since we just lived through it, I couldn't hold myself back.
Great. So a few questions came in via the chat, or via the Q&A function. So Courtney asks, can we discuss what might be expectations for grant funding? For example, if we rely on corporate giving, I'm hearing grants are being suspended. My reaction is to look at all funders in retail or related and just expect nothing from them in this year. Is that a good assumption? So Courtney, just to take a shot at that myself, I would point you, rather than us trying to expound on that with our limited knowledge, point you to the webinar that we did a few weeks back where we had impact investors give their perceptions of how the funding ecosystem is evolving. You can find that on our website. The general answer is yes. I think the funding ecosystem is drying up, and the most likely source of funding is your current funders and getting extensions and further follow-up funding from them. So would point you to that, and if you have any questions following that, feel free to let us know.
Let me add something here, if I might. I mean, because we're doing well on time, and I'm liking the questions. But Courtney, yours was a very specific one that said, this is the situation, and sort of linear. It probably get worse. It certainly won't get any better. I think that's reasonable, and you should be doing that, particularly now. That's the play not to lose operation. But on the recovery mode, you might find that the situation has shifted significantly, and you need to get more aggressive. You need to establish relationships, or begin establishing now relationships that will serve you there. So I would use the scenarios as a way to realize that there are a host of new opportunities as well as hidden risks and liabilities with the, relative to your past operations, to the pre-pandemic operations. So being a scenario person today and having my scenario hat on, I'd say expand your thinking and see what comes and what you should be doing. It's not just going and getting more from existing folks, which may serve today's needs, but tomorrow's may require a different approach altogether.
Great, thanks, Rob. That's useful context. So Daphne asks, what advice do you have toward committing funding toward anticipated scenarios based on these lead indicators before the events have occurred? For example, buying a lot of protective gear or medicines for health workers in anticipation of rising cases. Risk is it would be a sunk cost if the anticipation was wrong, or would one stop at establishing supply chain partners with capacity and preparedness and reserve them?
Well, now you've gone one level below where I did, but it's an appropriate level, so I'm not uncomfortable with it. I just want to make it clear I didn't try to get down to how do you make decisions once you start to see the scenarios emerge. And the answer is that you're going to have to do that kind of risk assessment and cost-benefit analysis individually. It's a straightforward business question of if you act, what would be the implications if it doesn't pan out? If you don't act, what are the implications? And really, it's a question of when do you have enough information to feel comfortable making the investment? But that's true for almost any investment. So you will be dealing with uncertainty. It's a question, in part, of how large an investment and a commitment you need to make. And often when there's a lot of uncertainty, but not acting would seem or is definitely a challenge, then often there's ways to make small bets, to test it out, to start to see that move you in the right direction, overcome inertia, but don't put you all in. You don't put all of your chips on the bet. You make small bets so that you can mitigate the risks, both the risks of committing, but also the risks of foregoing commitment and missing an opportunity. So I've given you the logic of the decision, but I haven't really told you what to do. You'll have to make each one of those decisions on your own. And literally everyone that sees emerging scenarios will face the same situation. Miller Center, every business I know will be looking at those kinds of choices.
Great, thanks, Rob. And as soothing as Rob and my voices are, would encourage all you to raise your hands and chime in so we can hear from folks other than ourselves. In the meantime, while you're doing your vocal warm-ups, want to call on a question that could, I think, use some clarity. And Rob, maybe go back to one of your slides on this. But Xiao asks, hi, Rob and Alex, which areas should we assess based on the 4 scenarios besides cash flow? So I think we had a list on one of the slides, Rob, of the different types of impacts you should be considering in each of those scenarios. Do you want to maybe show that slide again?
Yes. Excuse me as I click through up. Was this the one? This is the one you're thinking about, right? What?
There we go. Yeah.
Yeah. I didn't put cash flow down here, but because right now you should be very focused, maniacally focused on cash flow issues and funding issues. Absolutely true. I assume that will continue going forward. These are things that affect how you spend what monies you have, what revenues or sources of funds you might get that affect your cash flow. So these are elements in and around the financial aspects. But I didn't list cash as the major thing. But what do you need to stop doing? That's a very important question that I do think needs to be addressed. It's hard to stop doing things you've always done, but the reality is, particularly if cash is less, and it is in all of these scenarios, in some cases drastically less, you'll need to stop doing some things. And deciding that is very important. You'll also need to do things differently, which is the bullet above. Related to the stopping things is modifying things you're doing. Is a way to do what you're doing much less, with lower cost. Doing more with less was a major theme that came out of our planning as we looked at different scenarios, and it's stronger in some than others. Importantly, what elements stay the same. So that's how you're going to spend your money. The next one, looking down below, is around how are your user and customer needs changing? Are there new ways to generate revenue? Pivoting your business model was something that we talked about in an earlier webinar, and it's on our website and it's available. You should have pivoted your business model now in order to go into the play not to lose mode. That is, managing your cash flow is the first step, but also what is it you need to do differently in order to adapt to the new realities. But after you're done with that and you move into recovery mode, if customer needs have changed significantly, people need different things, or they need less of what you offered, but the needs are widespread. Just basic elements are presenting themselves, and you used to provide a wide range of offerings, products and services. Now people just need the basics. You're going to need to pivot. You're going to need to shift again to move into recovery mode. And that's also where partnerships come in, because partnerships are basically ways of leveraging whatever cash and your team's time are, so that you can get accomplish more in collaboration with folks. So the answer to your question is, everything will come back to cash, but you don't just look at the cash. You have to look at the things that you're going to be using that to fund investments or just ongoing programs, new programs, as well as ways of raising the monies that that flow in. So that was a long, rambling answer, but it was so important. I decided to get expansive here so you can understand why the major bullet here isn't manage your cash. If you're not doing that, it's unlikely you're actually going to enter a recovery mode.
Thanks, Rob. And I'll just say, if managing your cash is what you need to focus on right now, we have a great webinar led by Steve White on our website, focused on crisis cash flow management, which walks you through a framework of how to quantify both the impact of the crisis on your cash and your different mitigation strategies. So would highly encourage you to check that out if survival and cash flow management is kind of the primary focus of what you're doing right now before you get into this kind of recovery planning.
And just building on that, cash flow management, well, first, the immediate thing was just getting ready to make all of the changes, but cash flow management and pivoting your business model were two important pieces. Scenario planning is an important piece about what to do next. They all fit together. They're not independent of each other, although you may approach them as though they are. Ultimately, they fit together to allow you to first survive and then to thrive.
Great. So we'd love to hear another person's voice on this call. So if you have a question, please feel free to raise your hand, or if you just want to chime in and tell us how great we are, we're open to that as well.
So did we cover the questions?
So there's another question in the Q&A that we can get to. Umbaka Brian asks, how can this apply to the health sector, looking at recovery for some essential services that have fizzled out? So Rob, let me know if that question makes sense, or Mbaka. Maybe.
No, I need a little bit more to be able to respond. Otherwise, my tendency to ramble will only be magnified by the uncertainty that I have about what the question is.
Mbaka, can you either raise your hand and clarify that question out loud, or feel free to type in some extra detail so we know how to address that question appropriately.
Well, let me just give a comment in general, and I'm not answering anyone's specific question. But one thing I want to emphasize is that this is meant to be valuable because it provides real insight about what to start doing now to prepare for the recovery without overcommitting yourself, and it doesn't detract away from what you're doing to survive. But it is powerful when you use it, and it's not that difficult to employ. I think I've made that clear, but I just wanted to emphasize this isn't some laborious planning process that you wonder at the end of it why you went through it. I think our recent experience, Alex, and others that have been through it, is that it does have value, and it does actually not only give you good insights, but it actually makes the team feel better about understanding what's the future. So Mbaka is ready to chat, I see.
Mbaka, go ahead.
Yeah, I was looking at a scenario where currently, like in Kenya, you find most of the focus has shifted towards the COVID-19 in terms of the supplies that are being bought for different health facilities. So even as we do this scenario planning, how do you ensure that there is a balance in terms of how we prioritize the medical supplies that are being bought? Because you find some of the essential services are kind of being left behind. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Well, I mean, let's see how to answer your question without. The reality is that medical services, in particular, if you look at these scenarios, if you want to create your own, again, feel free to do that. But using this basic framework, medical services are going to be different, significantly different in the four scenarios, I'm looking at scenario 3 going, wow, with a weakened economy, people being able to afford less, governments being, debt being heavy, unemployment being high, and the medical systems, delivery systems being significantly affected and damaged. People are going to be looking for just the most basic kind of healthcare. There will be extreme cases to be sure, but people are just going to need help meeting the basic health needs, and fancy isn't going to be required. If you look in contrast down to scenario 1, that would say that, in fact, there was a bounce back, and health care, while damaged, started to recover relatively quickly, and the economy was supporting that, so that you would see some things being curtailed, but basically everyone shifting to focus on the most near-term needs, but there'd still be a wealth of capabilities that could deliver. One way to think about difficult territory scenario 1 is that it's as we found, it sort of represents a forcing function to do the things that you need to do and probably needed to do in healthcare anyway to get better at it. If you look at scenario 2, on the other hand, you would need to do, how shall I say it, more with less, as a way to try and find a way to improve what you can do it cheaper, but still start to deliver it. Scenario 4 gives you a situation where the healthcare industry suppliers and the healthcare ecosystem in general is reeling, but the economy is starting to fund that. So there would actually be opportunities for innovation and improvement, assuming you could find the funds. So rather than just say it's gonna fail, I think, again, it's useful to look at those, and maybe relatively soon in any given country, you'll be able to tell which of these scenarios is likely to happen. But I think at this point right now, there's still a fair amount of uncertainty. Mbaka, I hope that was helpful.
Yeah, thank you, it was.
Good.
Yeah, and I think just to add to that, I think, Mbaka, we are not experts in healthcare in Kenya. You and your team are. And so I think what we're encouraging you to do is to work through this framework and these scenarios and establish the leading indicators as we've suggested, but do that with your team. And I think we have confidence and faith in you and your team that you will have the answers to many of your own questions. I think we're just trying to provide the framework and a methodology for you to pull those answers from kind of your collective brain trust, I guess.
Correct. Well said.
One final question came in from Julie via the chat. So are there emerging tech-enabled platforms that could help in reviving supply chains, i.e. accelerated use, new applications for contact tracing, fintech platforms, etc.? Rob, I don't know if you want to take that or if that's a question we kind of take offline with Julie.
Well, offline probably is better because I don't have the full answer to the list of platforms that will work. But let me provide an answer that's coming to us from real life experience, working with some communities that have needed to respond. Supply chains have shown a real brittleness in some areas. Not only in healthcare, but we're seeing it in food. We saw it in PPEs, from masks to shields to gowns. And part of the change that's going to occur is not only technology shifts to make things better and stronger, but a shift away from just in time to what I would call just in case, more of a resiliency aspect. So don't just assume that the technologies that you'll see will just strengthen traditional old ones. I think you're going to see people looking to shift to maybe, and resiliency can come from going small or finding new ways of working or building in redundancy, a host of things. So be broad in your thinking about supply chain improvement or recovery. Don't just assume that it's like it was before. And then we can go offline because I've hit the end. I don't know anything more about supply chains that I could give you right here.
Well, great. So let me, on behalf of kind of all the listeners, thank you, Rob, for putting this together and taking the time to walk us through this. Excuse me. As I mentioned, we have been recording this call, and we'll send out both the slides and the recording, as well as in the next few days, kind of a one-pager summary of what we covered today. For that, and for all the other recordings and webinars that we've been putting on, please go to our COVID-19 website, which you can find via our homepage. And as always, if you have any questions or other content you would like Miller Center to produce for you that would be helpful, please feel free to let me know. So thank you all. Thanks for joining, and I hope you all have a good rest of your day. And thank you again.